talking logistics. There's a Q&A function, hopefully on your screen. So we really encourage you to ask questions, but would ask you to use the Q&A function rather than the chat function to pose your questions as we go through the webinar. I'll go ahead and get this started. So welcome everybody. My name is Hank Havoc. I'm the co-founder of the Water Finance Exchange. And I saw the list of attendees. You are an impressive group, and we couldn't have a better group of experts to help define and talk about getting our arms around this problem of water loss. And because we have such a great group of experts, I'm going to give you a break, and I'm going to be very brief in my opening remarks. But I did want to just say a couple of things to set the stage for everybody. First, briefly, Water Finance Exchange is a nonprofit organization. We work in multiple states, although primarily in Texas these days. We partner with smaller communities and provide what we call comprehensive technical and financial assistance, because as those of you from communities know, communities face multiple challenges. They're technical, they're operational, they're financial, and all those issues are important to be able to get financed for improving your water systems and then for being able to operate those sustainably. So we bring experts from often all over the country to deal with whatever issues the communities we work with have, and make sure that you can both get funded and fund it affordably. Anyway, more to come. We're happy to talk more about that later, but we want to get into the webinar. WFX is a great team, though, and you will see several of our people on this webinar. I want to just give a special shout out to Jackson Parr and to Leah Clark, who have really pulled this together. So just to kick it off, so Water Finance Exchange, we have worked with dozens of communities in Texas. And every time we work with a community, we learn something new and we apply that to the next communities we work with. And there's certain common themes. And one common theme, unfortunately, is the amount of water loss that we see occurring in systems all over the state and all over the country. And imagine driving your car around with a hole in the gas tank. Nothing good comes of that. There's nothing you can say that's good if gas is leaking out of your tank or if water is leaking out of your system. There are issues, obviously, those translate to dollars and cents, and every dollar is precious to be able to manage your system affordably. It affects economic development, the attractiveness of the area where you live, and certainly has significant resource issues resource conservation issues that are important. We'll hear about all those today, but we'll also hear about, so how do we address it? How do we turn that around? So if you have water loss, you've got a lot of problems, but if you address water loss, and there are multiple ways to address it, flip those problems on their head and you've got multiple benefits. And we also have some tailwinds that were created by the Texas legislature. Proposition 6, which created this $1 billion Texas water fund, focuses to a great deal on water supply and managing water supply effectively, especially for smaller and rural communities. And that's exactly, and water loss is front and center with that issue. So let's get started. Let me introduce our first speaker. What we're going to do is we'll have a true expert help set the stage on the scope of the problem, and then we'll have a panel of experts talk about ways of addressing that. So we're delighted that our first speaker is Jennifer Walker, who's the director of the Texas Coast and Water Program for the National Wildlife Federation. She's a UT grad. Her resume is too long, it would take up half the webinar, but she is, let me just say that she's involved in water management issues all over the state, particularly conservation issues. And I know personally that she's a thought leader on water conservation and management that we all turn to. So with that, let me just turn it over to Jennifer. Thank you.
Good morning. It's always nice to start the day having somebody say really nice things about you. So thank you, Hank, and thank you all for inviting me to be part of this webinar this morning. So I work at National Wildlife Federation, and folks probably have ideas about the stuff that we do and everything, but I really work mainly on water policy and water supply planning. And the reason that I do that is because I think it's really, really interesting, and I love doing it. But also we want to make sure that we have water in our rivers and streams to support fish and wildlife habitat. And if we don't manage water well in our cities, we're not going to accomplish that. But one of our other big goals is we care very deeply about our communities and want everyone to have access to resilient and affordable water supplies. So we're doing our part to help push the needle on that, working with the folks on this call. And then also I'm looking at the attendees. There's lots of good water colleagues and advocates on here that we work with day in and day out. So thanks for being here. Oh, I don't have the slides. So next slide. I was trying to advance the slides on my computer. So we're going to be talking about strategies to reduce water loss today. And so my job is to give y'all a lay of the land and kind of what's going on and some work that we've done. We published this report, Hidden Reservoirs, and just right before the last legislative session, and it really helped set the tone for some of the discussion around water supply and infrastructure and water loss in particular. That we provided some really good data. Lots of folks on this call helped elevate it. But so we're going to go through some of our findings and kind of a lot of the activity that's happening in the past year and kind of how we can operationalize that. So next slide. So our analysis that we did, we looked at water loss audits that are submitted by utilities in Texas, and we did this really big analysis with it. It was pretty comprehensive, and we found that Texas utilities, and this is based on 2019 water audits, are losing about 572,000 acre feet of water per year. So this corresponds to about 51 gallons of water per service connection per day. And that's huge. I mean, I love Hank's description of driving around with a leaky gas tank. So these are leaky water lines. And so we're losing a lot of water on average across the state per day. This is about equal to about 90% of the average flow in the Rio Grande River, and is equal to the amount of water that El Paso, Lubbock, Fort Worth, Austin, and Laredo combined use on an average year. Our analysis includes both real and apparent losses for the folks that really dig into water loss on this call. And really, these numbers suggest that we've got a real opportunity here in Texas. Texas is growing and drying, so it's really important to ensure that as much water as possible is reaching its intended destination. Next slide. So then we really wanted to look at so we know how much water loss we're having, but what's the potential to reduce that across the state? We did an analysis called a frontier analysis using all this data. And I have another much longer presentation that goes into all the nitty-gritty behind that. But basically, we determined 3 different performance levels: average, good, and very good performance levels. And if utilities achieve these different performance levels, then we can reduce water loss a certain amount. And really, the good performance level, which means that these utilities that achieve good performance level are achieving water loss performance equivalent or better than the current water loss of 75% of their peer utilities. So, they're doing better than average, but it's not, there's a lot of utilities that are achieving this. So we could see savings of almost 250,000 acre feet. And then we have very good performance level, which means that the water loss performance is equivalent or better than the current water losses of 90% of the peer utilities in the state. And when I say peer utilities, I mean, we don't just wholesale compare utilities. We're looking for utilities with similar attributes. And so there's a lot more about the technical background on this analysis in the appendix of our report, and I'll have a link to it later on this presentation. But if all utilities, we're going to focus in here on the good performance level. If all utilities achieve the good performance level, the savings across the state would be greater than the increase in the municipal water needs that are identified in the 2022 state water plan. So that's huge. I mean, so we're looking at, there's a water needs in the state water plan for the municipal water use category, and the savings that we could get from reducing water loss to the good performance level are equal to those needs. Now, the water saved wouldn't be necessarily where it's needed in every case, but in a lot of cases it would be. So, and it's really important too, because the looking at some of the large utilities, which is where a lot of the water loss is, this is where half the Texas's population lives. So there's really significant opportunity. Of course, we want to make sure that we're looking at all utilities across the state. No, looking at water loss in urban versus rural communities or big versus small. We have to address this across the board and really look at where the highest need is. Okay, next. So also as part of our work, we wanted to see if mitigating water loss could help meet water needs in the state water plan in a significant way. The state water plan calculates need for each planning region by estimating the demands and then subtracting out the supplies. The results represent the water demands that an existing region the existing water supplies cannot meet. So we compare the municipal water needs for each of the Texas's 16 regional water planning groups or the regions against the savings potential estimated. And these estimates account for the municipal water loss, water management strategies already in the group. So what we did was some of these planning groups, like for example, Region H in Houston, already had a water management strategy that looked at water loss. So we did not count that. We didn't want to double count. So we made sure to back out all the existing strategies in our regional water plans that focus on water loss. And then we also added in our estimates and then came across this. So if you can see the darker blue that you see here means that more needs can be met. So you can see here Region C, Region H, Region K, Region L, which is where some of the big population centers are. A large amount of the needs can be met in those regions, just doing a simple kind of calculation. And I do want to say that it's important to note that the savings and the needs are not always evenly distributed. So you have to really look on a case-by-case basis. As we all know, water supply management is very local and very dependent on the specific situation in each utility. Everyone's got a different set of circumstances they're dealing with, although there are some commonalities. Next slide. We also wanted to look at cost. We wanted to really not just state like, hey, here's a problem and we're losing a lot of water. We wanted to kind of say also, and there's ways to look at it, and is it cost effective? So a couple of the things to look at to see if water loss mitigation is cost effective is you look at the scale of the water loss mitigation program. For example, replacing 1,000 meters. I mean, 1,000 meters of pipe will generally be more expensive on a per meter basis or on a per gallon basis of water loss reduction than replacing 10,000 or 100,000 meters. So if you're looking at replacing meters or looking at infrastructure replacement or repair, there is an economy of scale sometimes. The baseline level of water loss and general water loss systems that are in poor condition and have high water loss can make substantial reductions at a lower cost than systems with lower water losses can achieve. Those losses, as your system becomes more and more tight, get kind of harder to find and require more resources to fix them. That's not always the rule, but and then there's the environmental, technical, and economic factors such as soil condition, topographic variations that lead to higher variable pressure, raw or finished water quality, and the cost of labor. Materials is something we hear about all the time as being a real big cost. And then the suitability of this particular strategy. So has your utility collected and analyzed sufficient and reliable data to select the appropriate technologies and strategies? So as you can see from this graphic, there's a wide range of costs for each water loss mitigation strategy. It's largely based on the factors that I just outlined. Again, the report has a whole section on looking at these particular water loss mitigation strategies and looking at some of the cost factors, and we also have some case studies. But the bottom line is that in many cases, the cost of water loss mitigation practices compare favorably to supply side alternatives. This can help utilities really think about and select the appropriate mix of water management strategies. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention that it's unlikely that a water loss mitigation program will produce results and be cost effective if it's not data driven, well planned, and effectively managed. So there's programs being put in place to help ensure that utilities have the resources to have data-driven solutions, to have better data. I'll talk about that in just a second. Next slide. So I kind of just laid out like what is the water loss in the state. It's substantial, and that there's a lot of opportunity to reduce water loss cost effectively. And that message was really heard by the legislature, by the Water Development Board, by lots of folks on this call. We've all used these numbers and talked about them in various venues. There's been a lot of movement on water loss in the past year, and I really expect for us to be making some substantial progress on this in the next couple of years. You know, I think all the machinery is just getting ramped up now. There's been a lot of people working really hard on this for a long time, and we're going to learn from them but the legislature has invested in water infrastructure through SB 28 and then Prop 6, which the voters voted on. And it prioritizes water loss. That's, you know, they listed a few things that were priorities for investment. Water loss mitigation is one of them. The legislature also approved funding for the Water Development Board for additional staff. The Water Development Board has a lot of programs spiraling up right now. They are prioritizing water loss data accuracy through a level 1 validation program, which will help utilities get better, more accurate data. They're hiring, well, they may have already hired the 4 staff people. If not, they're in the process of it and of getting the final ones on board to work with utilities. I mean, that's, you know, over 100% increase in the water loss staff at the Water Development Board. They're increasing technical and financial assistance for utilities. They've got some programs going on. There is an acronym for the Water Loss Technical Assistance Program that I cannot remember right now. I bet one of the other folks, panelists, know it. The Water Development Board is working with the Water Conservation Advisory Council to develop guidance that will be provided to the regional water planning groups to help them develop water management strategies that are focused on water loss. Because in the regional water planning process, we now have to have a separate and distinct water management strategy that is water loss mitigation. In most of the previous plans, water loss has been kind of lumped in under conservation. It doesn't have a discrete number or savings factor attached to it. So we don't really know how much of the water in our regional state water plans will be coming from water loss mitigation. So this is really good. All these things combined on this slide are all pointing to each other and going to create a much better atmosphere for addressing water loss in the state. Next slide. One thing I want to point out, I just mentioned this, but SB 28, prioritizes water loss mitigation. They have a list of 5 things that they want the Texas Water Fund to prioritize for investment. Water loss mitigation is one of them. We worked really hard on this at session. Lots of folks on this call supported that effort, and this is a big deal. So we're in a big moment for that. This is the Texas Water Fund it was $1 billion bill, but $750 million of it's going towards infrastructure investment, and water loss mitigation is one of those things. Next slide. I think this is my last slide. So We mentioned Prop 6. I just want to say that this was overwhelmingly passed. We had a lot of propositions on the ballot in November. It was overwhelmingly passed. And it's, it's back last November. It's old news, but it was one of the highest passing propositions on the ballot. So Texans really do support water infrastructure investment. And so implementation on Prop 6, it's happening now. The Water Development Board is seeking input on elements of the Texas Water Fund. They've got 3 surveys up. They're open through April 30th. They're also accepting written comments. We're going to be posting the surveys with the answers on them on our website in the next couple of days here. So if folks want to use those to answer them themselves. There's going to be rulemaking on some of the other various programs that are going to support the implementation and rollout of the Texas Water Fund, including the Rural Water Assistance Fund, D-Fund, the New Water Supply for Texas Fund. All of those are going to be happening. So if you're a policy nerd and you like to write comments on rulemakings or just want to see what's happening, that's a good place. All that stuff is on the Water Development Board's website here. And I think the next slide is just a link to the report if folks want to take a look at it. We have a 4-page version of it that's short, and we have a long version if you want to really get in the weeds and read about what a frontier analysis is and how we got all this data that's crammed into these beautiful graphics. And that's it. And I think we're gonna pass it on and have questions after in a little bit.
Yeah, well, thanks so much, Jennifer, for running through that report. And I think there's a lot of valuable information there. So appreciate sharing that. I just wanted to plug again that if there's any questions, just use the Q&A function that we have on the Zoom. And then kind of before we get into the panel, we have Hattie Miller here. So I'll ask her to come up and kind of share her story. Ms. Miller has been the general manager at Starville Water Supply Corporation. So we're going to hear about how a small system really addresses their water loss. Her system serves over 350 folks, and they've got 2 large commercial customers. And so just want to hear from her on how she navigated water loss as a challenge for a small system, and then we'll get into the panel. But again, if there's any questions, just use the Q&A function, and I'll pass it over to you, Hattie.
Okay, thank you for inviting me to represent Starville Water Supply Corporation. As you said, we are a smaller system. We have 423 customers, and 361 of those is active. And I wrote this memo on water loss efficiency that what we do, here at Starville. First, I'd like to say Starville takes pride in maintaining an efficiency operation posture regarding unaccountable water loss. Our strategy is pretty simple, and it includes the following practices. We are blessed to start with by having advantage of a new system installed in 1999 and 2001 with adequate depth of mains and quality construction. Diligent monthly loss audits takes care of master meters reading constantly with the ending of the day and meter reading, which is usually held to a 2-day period. In case of spikes in our water, in production, appearing in monthly audit or 2 consecutive days of daily use, we perform a valve cycling investigation, beginning at the point where the 2 mains arteries fork and follow a high flow sound in the quiet part of the day to locate a possible leak. Respond promptly to low pressure complaints. We use hydrant meters during flushing to precisely record flushing volumes, respond to line locate requests to keep main damages minimum, monitor new main construction to ensure quality installation, have all staff keep alert for standing water in abandoned places, which moving about the system. We also checking known weak points that lie across streams and in areas prone to washing after heavy rain, meant to events to attention that may be needed due to a flood, pressure, or erosion. And I'd like to also say that this is very, very important. And I think this is one reason why that I participate, even though I got a meter reader, to read the meters, is simply because we can see things out there. You can see things, standing water, or either you get a chance to take a look at the customers' meters to see if they are spinning and if they have a leak. And we notify them by going knocking on their doors and alerting them, or either calling them on the phone. And sometimes I also just shut the meter off at the box and I'll leave them a note to give me a call. So these are the things that we do, here at Starville. And we're a pretty tight system and we're new. And I normally print on the water bills for the customers to, if they don't live at that location, to turn their water off at the meter box. And it's just certain things that we do to practice in order to control some of the water loss.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's a really great proactive approach, and really, really appreciate you again taking the time today to share your story and talking through some of the things that you're doing as a smaller system to mitigate water loss. We know it's a big deal in the state. And so just want to thank you again for your time, and we can get into the rest of the panel discussion today too. So I'll invite our other panelists to turn their cameras on. That's Mr. Buzz Pishker, Mr. Donovan Burton, and then we'll have Jennifer Walker up again. So thanks again, Ms. Miller, for joining today. And we know you have a lot to get to with the system, and you're kind of steering the boat there. So we appreciate you even taking the time today to discuss with us.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. And I'll take some time today to introduce the other panelists that we have today. So we've heard already from Jennifer Walker. So thanks again, Jennifer, for introducing us to the topic. And then we also have on the line Mr. Walter Buzz Pishker. So Buzz is currently the Senior Planning and Operations Consultant for the City of Amarillo. And he formerly served as Director of Utilities for the City of Arlington, Texas. And then he also provides expert consultation for utilities and industry strategic initiatives across the country as an independent contractor. And he's one of the senior advisors here at Water Finance Exchange. So we're really lucky to have him. Buzz, you want to come off and just share with folks kind of the perspective you're bringing to today's panel, and then we'll go over to Donovan.
Sure. Sure. Thanks, Leah. And boy, thanks, Jennifer and Hattie. Jennifer, I love the technology thing, because you're going to see in some of my comments, I think that really plays into helping us achieve things we couldn't achieve when I first got into this industry in 1970. And Hattie's personal touch, I really put a smile on my face. It's nice to have a new system, but when you actually go out and shut people's water off that may be leaking, or call them and do those kind of things, smaller systems, that's a nice touch. So I was really impressed with that. Sorry about that. So anyways, just to give you some background, I'm going to have a slide that I'm going to put up, but I want to tell you my background and my perspective, because it's probably a little bit different than some of my colleagues. Spent 30 years in the Midwest. And as you know, in the Midwest, we have the greatest body of fresh water in the world in the Great Lakes. And especially if you live in the state of Ohio, you have Lake Erie for sure. And actually the company I ran, which served about 100 systems in the state of Ohio and another 40 or 50 in Pennsylvania, was publicly traded on the New York Stock Exchange, though it was an investor-owned company. But we had 3 water plants on Lake Erie, and so we had plenty of water. We had rain, and by the way, it was, and so then, and by the way, the average usage per month in the Midwest is about 4,000 gallons. That's residential usage. So I had the good fortune of having a chance to move to Texas and become the director of the city of Arlington, as Leah mentioned. And it was fascinating because I got there just in time to have the drought record. And in the Southwest, same way with my home here in Florida, the average residential usage is about 9,000 gallons a month. So significantly more water is being used because of irrigation, obviously, but quite a difference. And we got into some discussions at the time, and of course, in water challenged areas like some of the Southwest, California certainly has that issues, Florida. We have what's called drought contingency plans, and they're mandatory by the state, and they need to be updated every 5 years. And I think that makes a lot of sense. But I had to kind of balance the equation, and that's will be the gist of the slide that we'll see when in a little bit. But so to me, there was a big difference between routine water conservation and drought contingency planning. Most people don't want to live in an emergency state every day of their life. There are times, COVID, I think, was probably the one closest to our minds, where you do special things and you have to do things you never thought you'd ever do in your life, but you do it to get by a situation. And in a lot of ways, in my world, that's important, and that's part of the process. So as I got to Arlington and we were dealing with some of these issues, I kind of had to talk to council and people about that balancing act. And Jackson, can you put up that little slide I have, and maybe I can talk to that a second, and then I'll give Donovan screen. But what you see in front of you is what I provided to our city council when we were in the midst of some of the challenges that I talked about. And this teeter-totter can balance, right? You can have nothing on the left, you can have just the things on the right. In our case, we had a lot of things on the left and not a lot of things on the right. And I want to make a couple points with this. Number one, if you look at the left-hand side of this balance, the rain barrels, flow restrictors, sprinkling bans, low flow toilets, none of those reduce water loss. Those reduce usage. And I think it's important that when you're running a utility, which has to fund pipe replacements and all the CapEx and everything else, that you don't starve the revenue stream, so then you can't fix the problems which come with aging infrastructure, et cetera, that Jennifer talked about, and I'm sure Donovan will talk about. So I said to council, we've done some of these things on the left, but even when I was in Ohio with all this wealth of water, a lot less usage, the greatest freshwater body of water in the world and all these things, a couple of things on the right-hand side we were doing, and all of the things we were doing on the right-hand side when I left. And we talk about source of supply and extending it. So we've got the things on the left. They lower usage, no question about it. They have an adverse impact on rates, and they impact quality of life. So that's the balance here. But I believe strongly that the utility operator, of which I was one for 50 years of my life, and proud to be that, and proud to be working with WFX to help smaller systems, believe the things on the right that you see will do the stuff that Jennifer and Hattie and some others have been talking about that I want to highlight. And that is, those things will reduce cost. They will optimize your current source of supply. They will extend that source of supply, and they will give you water that's being saved, like Jennifer showed, that can meet future needs and demands and growth. And those are all the things that utilities struggle with constantly. If you look at valve operation, we already know there's studies that 60% of the valves in our country are either inoperable or not able to be found. That's an issue when you have main breaks or need shutdowns, because you shut down much larger areas, the water runs for much longer, so you have loss and overtime and a bunch of costs. And damage. Leaks cause damage to the roadways, etc. I had a full-time leak detection program in Ohio. We now have one of those in Arlington, and the full-time person is dedicated to doing that. I'll tell you the results of that over 6 years in a second. Meter change-out program, Hattie talked about that. Every utility that I've been associated with in the last 20 years is moving to AMR, AMI. That's not a water loss reduction, but that's a revenue enhancement. And Hattie even talked about it in one of our sidebars, that helps deliver the revenues for the water you're already producing and providing to the customers. It mitigates rate increases because you pick up the revenue versus just increasing rates. Plant optimization, we need to be managing our plants better, and we control that. And then strategic pipeline replacement, it's got to be strategic. No one's going to give you enough money to replace all of your pipe to make your lost water zero. So we need to be working on all these things. And I guess the message is, we use technology to achieve most of those things. We used pipe bursting, we used robotic pipe analysis and those kind of things to optimize our CapEx. Long story short, we went from 13% lost water to 6.5%. That was 2 billion gallons of water a day. So that's what can happen, but it's a balanced game and it's doing it all. But none of that is doing it all for any segment. You got to work on all the pieces, I guess, is what I'd say.
Yeah, I appreciate that perspective there, Buzz. And thanks so much for sharing that slide too. I think it'll be really helpful for folks. We're going to be posting this recording as well, so people can reference it. I wanted to also save some time so that we could talk with Mr. Burton that we have on the line here. So Donovan is the Vice President of Water Resources and Governmental Relations for the San Antonio Water System. He develops, manages, and maintains an abundant water supply for SAS. So just thought we could hear, Donovan, a little bit about your perspective before we get into some of our questions for the panelists.
Sure, thank you, Leah and the other panelists. It's good discussion. Very important topic, and something everybody is very focused on. So just a quick plug about SAWS, and it kind of runs into the water loss issues. You know, I kind of jokingly refer to us as the Disney of water utility geeks. And so we've got an amazing amount of best practices that we do here at SAWS, including our desalination, our aquifer storage and recovery, our recycled water system. We do have one of the leading conservation programs. So we just do a lot of really neat things at SAWS. I encourage obviously anybody on the panel or on the in the audience to come down, visit us. We can certainly show you a lot of good water geek things. The reason I bring up those issues is that the best practices, we have a long history of being involved in sort of leading edge best practices, and we're very focused on it. From a large utility perspective, water loss is definitely a priority. It should be considered not only as a best practice, but a water management tool. I think for everybody, we should look at it in a number of aspects, but certainly as an additional water resource, as kind of Jennifer referred to earlier, it is something in the water resources side. But water loss is not one thing. Obviously, it spans across the entire spectrum. It spans across the entire utility. Certainly for larger utilities, that involves a whole lot of people. It involves a whole lot of data, and bringing that together into common teams of people. And I think that's one of the things that helpful, which is just bringing together a team of experts internally and having a steering committee within our entity that really drives home the priorities in every different area. Buzz and Jennifer talked a little bit about technology. Your IS department, your human resources department are things you a lot of times don't think of in terms of water loss, but they are absolutely an important piece of this. So we certainly do, you know, as Buzz mentioned, the preventative maintenance is key. Leak detection, we've had a lot of changes in our leak detection team. We've had a team in place for a while, but a lot of times the leak detection groups get called off on reactive leak detection to deal with water main breaks that are happening right now. And so it really needs to be a more proactive approach. It's the hidden leaks that really drive the water loss numbers. People see the big spewing pipeline, and those are big and make the news and mean certainly water loss. But ultimately, the big drivers are not those. Well, those are seen by everybody. They're mitigated and impacted immediately. It's the things that are hidden and the things that are priority 3s or priority less than that, smaller valves that just leak continually small amounts. And that's really what's driving a lot of things around in our area. Certainly drought has been a big theme, and it changes that water from year to year. You can't take a water loss from one year to the next. Drought will certainly spike up water loss, and we've certainly been in a huge drought in Texas, and certainly in South Texas over the last really a couple of years. Maybe we're in the 4th year of a new drought of record. But ultimately, I just want to convey that you absolutely need to do all of those things. But this, if we're going to drive down real water loss, there's going to be an enormous sum of money that'll be required to fix a lot of mains, replace a lot of mains, replace service laterals, you know, our meters, those sorts of things. There's just an enormous amount of money that will be required to mitigate water loss. That is put on top of a growing population, so need for new supplies, need for new infrastructure, need to change sewer infrastructure. So we have a lot of drivers in budgets in water utilities, certainly in the fast-growing areas, and those will be. But water loss absolutely has to be among those priorities, and we're certainly doing that. I know a lot of utilities are. Most utilities are. And so we're committed to driving down water losses, as I know every water utility in Texas is doing. That's kind of our basic general, but we can get into specifics and questions.
Yeah. Well, no, I appreciate you going through that as well, Donovan, and sharing how SAS kind of tackles and looks at water loss. I know that water loss is a big priority for the state, and it also feels like a really big challenge, especially for some of the systems that we work with at Water Finance Exchange. So the first question I thought I'd start us out with is kind of helping folks identify what some of the key indicators are when they're looking at water loss for their systems, and how they can use some of those indicators to define a goal for water conservation so that we can start moving towards a problem to a solution. We could start off, maybe Buzz, you want to share your insights first and we can go around?
Sure. You know, Jennifer had a nice graph up there, and for those who maybe weren't paying attention, she had those boxes, and one was large meters. You know, sometimes the elephant seems so big, no one wants to start the process. And I think we need to be careful of that, because the process is doable, but it's not going to get done in a week or a day, and they're going to do it in pieces and parts. But large meters are always a place to start when you're looking for revenue and you're looking to properly price your product. So that's one thing to look at. We've done some things, and I assume Donovan has done it too. Hattie kind of talked about it, called district metering. And you can actually meter sections of your system. And with the new AMI metering systems, you can read your meters every hour if you want. So that's become a great technology tool to allow us to read all the meters in a district, compare it to the water that went through the district meter, and say, hey, is there a big discrepancy here? So there's some high spots. You know, you can always find the hole in the road that the water's bubbling out. That's not what I'm talking about. But, you know, there's some things that are hidden, like Donovan mentioned, that you can pick up with large metering, and you can certainly pick it up with district metering. And when I talk about large meters, I'm talking about commercial users, manufacturing facilities, etc. Meters 2 inch and above.
Yeah, thanks, Buzz. Anything to add to that, Donovan and Jennifer?
Yeah, I think that's a key point, and you know the district metering is a great tool, particularly and I think we mentioned every utility is a little bit different. Particularly SAWS, we have a highly decentralized system, a lot of sort of unique systems within our one system, and so a VDMA process, a virtual district metering process, is very key and very helpful for an entity like SAWS, and it can be obviously used in any entity, but so that is a key tool of ours that we are sort of, we have gotten process or started that process. You know, one of the things that we're also looking at is the types of materials. Again, our utility is an old system, unlike the Starville comments. Our system is very old, vast throughout the entire area. We have a lot of different materials in the ground. And sometimes our water loss efforts in the past haven't been focused on the right materials. And I think we're seeing the particular larger instances of breaks and leaks in certain materials than others. And it's a matter of identifying, locating those areas, and really tackling some of, or I guess, using your system to attack those particular areas in a priority fashion. So definitely a material aspect is key to this as well.
Yeah, let me add to that because I think that's an excellent piece of information. 70% of our main breaks in Arlington, Texas were on AC pipe, small diameter. We found a new technology, pipe bursting, to replace that. We would do a city block a day. We'd tell the residents, take your shower, leave in the morning. When you get home at night, you'll have a brand new water line, a brand new service line. Your driveway won't be tore up, and we'll address some of that stuff. That was an important focal point with data. I kept asking, we're spending X amount of dollars a year on main replacements. What we were doing was we were replacing mains and streets that we were renewing, because some mayors at some point, no one knew the mayor's name, of course, said, if there's a main break on that new street, somebody's head's going to roll. And I said, how often do we do a main replacement? They says, well, Buzz, every 30 years or so. I said, well, the pipe that's there is good for 100. Are we going to replace it 3 times? And the problem was we were spending money on that and not where our main breaks were. So we got some robotics, we got some technology to evaluate pipe. We then picked the right ones. And there's a bunch of stories I have online about real life Arlington experiences, which are very positive. But the point being, you can use technology, you can focus and optimize your replacements. And we went from 600 main breaks to 380 or so. So, you know, it's picking the right pipe, just what Donovan said, and I've experienced the same darn thing.
Yeah. Yeah, Jennifer, any thoughts from you on some of the indicators when folks are looking at a system's water loss and kind of how they can use those indicators to create goals for water conservation even? Oh, I think you're muted.
Sorry about that. I don't really have anything to add except for just, you know, the importance of having good data and information and really being strategic about how you address water loss. You know, the example from Buzz was great. Like, let's not just replace mains because we have the street tore up. Let's let's know our system and know where the weak points are and actually go to those versus just being opportunistic. You want to be strategic and have good data and good people and you know, use the tools you have.
Maybe we could elaborate too a little bit on what good data looks like. I know we talk a lot about combing through data, doing data analytics for water loss, but maybe you and Donovan and folks could share what good data looks like and kind of what would it look like to have meaningful data when you're looking to address water loss.
Well, so I can kick that off. You know, I would just want to give appreciation to SAWS and kind of their approach on water loss. I've learned a lot working with their excellent team, with Patrick and Karen and other folks there. You know, they really saw early on, and we actually profile them in the report as one of our case studies too, saw early on the need for good data, and were some of the first folks that I knew about that did like this level 1 validation for their, we have these annual water loss audits that we turn in Texas, and then we have one some utilities have them every 5 years. And you gather data about your system, but there's a lot of places where the data can, quite not quite match up right, or you need to go back and validate where you got this data and make sure that it's correct and that you're getting the best answer possible. SAWS really took that seriously and worked on getting this validation of their data early on. The Water Development Board and our state agency collects so much data on water loss, and utilities report it. And they also have a program in place in order to, and have hired several people to help utilities start to do these validation of their water loss data. So, so it's just very important, because you can try to solve a problem, but if you don't have all the right information about it, you might come out with a different answer than you would if you had good information about what your system is doing.
I've got a thought. There's a couple questions that I think are pretty close to what we're discussing. Number one, I can tell you that our reduction in lost water in Arlington was worth $2 million a year in operating costs to us. And I can also tell you from having run a water business that in government funding, that funds about $20 million of CapEx without any rate increases. So that's the magic that I think is potential for some of our colleagues. There's also a question about 15% line loss as a standard. That's been a national standard for almost as long as I've been in the business. And I think we can do better in the Southwest and the South and whatever. And I'll tell you why. All the northern, I'll call it north of, I guess, the Mason-Dixon line, or maybe Tennessee or so, most of those meters are in their homes because of freezing and whatever. In the Southwest and the South, most of our homes or meters are out at the street. So the service line, of which I had, I don't know, 500,000 in Ohio and Pennsylvania that was not metered, that leaks because they were old and poor material, wasn't recorded. So that was a loss to us. However, when I was in Arlington with a meter sitting at the street, if I had a service line that was leaking, if I had good metering in there, I was at least registering the loss and the customer could then correct it. So I think we can do a little better. When I went to Arlington, I felt that, but I didn't say that to anybody. I just said, let's do the things I think are appropriate and we'll see what the answer is. And I was more stunned about the answer than most people, but I think there is some potential for doing a better job in the southern areas that have metering at the curbs for sure.
Yeah, so this data issue is just huge, and we have a lot of opportunities coming up with all sorts of new technologies out there, and even AMI is an enormous benefit for us, that we can use the data to improve our water loss ultimately, and I think that's something we're still getting our hands around, is putting together kind of a data management team. Again, we're a large utility, almost 1,800 employees throughout, and so we have a lot of business data that we have to use in every particular department, but we also have to be careful not to be isolated within your department. You have to share that data and respond to that data. Ultimately, as I mentioned before, yes, you've got to develop all that and analyze it and come up with solutions, but that data needs to be turned into action items, action work, and that means crews out in the field. That means digging up a lot of streets. It means doing a whole lot of meter or line replacement. So all of that data will need to not just stop with developing a whole lot of academic work and papers and memos internally. It's got to turn into crews on the ground working. And that is tough to come by, particularly in a day and age like we are today. A lot of people competing, salaries are going up, benefits, all sorts of things. And so all of those are going to cost a lot of money, but also it's going to provide a lot of benefit to customers. And that turns into a little bit of the relationship issue. One of the things I wanted to kind of mention, and it kind of goes to data as well, it's an education piece of it. Jennifer's doing a great job of that. We've got to educate our leaders. That means local leaders, elected leaders, state, federal, everybody, to understand what water loss means in real terms, what the benefits are to driving them down, and not just sort of some buzzwords. You got to be very specific about your utility and what you're going to be tackling. So that data should be turned into an education outreach and work order process as well.
Yeah, thanks.
Leah, I'd like to add a couple thoughts.
Yeah, of course.
Just real quick. I very much agree. Donathan talked about people and HR and those kind of things. I coined a new definition of sustainability when I was with the city that I very much believe in. And it's not an engineering definition. It's the attraction, development, and retention of in-house intellectual capital. And it's what we've been talking about. It's people. People make utilities sustainable. People get work done, not motors and pumps. It's the people. So, that's a high priority for all of us. And the other thing I would add, I ran large systems, but I ran some very small systems like Hattie's actually. And one thing that I think we miss sometimes, and one of the struggles is the big system solutions sometimes don't transition to the small systems. So I think we've really got to look at the system and not the world as a globe and say, what can solve this system's unique challenges versus, what solves somebody else's. We may be able to pull pieces and parts, but it doesn't always fit the same because of a lot of reasons that we all know. But I think, again, if we can really focus on a system and its challenges and find tools that make it work, I think we'll be making a lot more headway than maybe we have in the past.
Yeah, and just one more sort of tail on that point, and we talk about mentioning it, educating elected officials and that sort of thing. That uniqueness of the systems, it is difficult to understand from an elected official trying to write a regulatory piece of paper to say everybody shall follow the same recommendations. We have a lot of regulators that will put together something to say all you utilities need to deal with your water loss. But those systems are unique and need to be addressed in a unique fashion. They absolutely need to be a priority, but sort of higher level regulatory aspects are difficult to come by because of some of those unique challenges.
Absolutely. And I want to be mindful of time, but I have one more question just from the Q&A that I'd like to ask. And I wanted to know, a question from Sheila, do you all consider line flushing water loss? There seems to be some debate about it being the cost of business or unaccounted water loss. So just wanted to see if we could get a quick answer on that before we close out today.
My quick answer is I never measured unaccounted for water. I measured metered ratio. And I use it on a 13-month rolling average. So I'm comparing what left the plant and what got billed. And we can, there's too much fudge in between. And so if we really want to address this thing, you use what did you produce and put in the system, and what did the system tell you people bought, and the difference is what we better be working on. So that's how we approached it.
And I agree. It is an authorized part of the non-revenue water calculation, but it is an authorized business use. But I will say it is very important internal to your utility to make sure that data is understood. A lot of times the crews will flush water, but that information doesn't get back to the people that are putting together the data on water loss. And so sometimes that water gets hidden and becomes water loss, but it should be identified and tracked in an efficient manner so that we understand it and aren't tackling a problem that's not there.
All right. Well, thanks so much, folks. Really appreciate you all joining us for today's panel and all of the attendees that took time out of their day. We really appreciate all of the work that y'all have put in and contributing some questions and sharing your perspectives. So just wanted to say, if anybody out there has any issues with water loss, or they just have a question that they'd like answered about really any infrastructure issues, we're open at Water Finance Exchange to working with folks, and you can find out more about us at our website. And we'll be posting this webinar on the website as well. So thanks everybody for joining us on the water loss webinar today for opportunities in Texas, and appreciate your time.
Thanks,
Thank
Leah.
you.
Donovan, Jennifer, great to be with you.
Well
Yeah,
done.
great.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.